During a surprise visit to an orphanage he funds, a millionaire meets four 5-year-old twins who capture his attention with their unity and hope of being adopted together. Touched by their request to never be separated, he decides to adopt them, facing resistance from family and friends who doubt his ability to raise so many children. However, he proves to everyone that love and determination are enough to transform his life and the lives of the twins. Marcus Reynolds adjusted his blue silk tie as the elevator rose to the top floor of the skyscraper that housed his company in Manhattan. At 42, he had built an empire in the financial market, but something was still missing from his life. That October morning, his assistant reminded him of his scheduled visit to the Sunshine Children's Home, one of the orphanages that his foundation supported financially. "Mr. Reynolds, the car is waiting," announced Patricia, his longtime assistant, as soon as he stepped out of the elevator. "And don't forget the meeting with the investors at 3. Marcus nodded distractedly, picking up his leather briefcase. Visits to the social projects he financed were usually quick: photo, handshake, check. But something seemed different that morning. An inexplicable restlessness had accompanied him since he woke up. The drive to the orphanage in Queens was silent. Marcus watched the city through the dark windows of his Mercedes, thinking about how his life had become a predictable sequence of meetings and corporate decisions. His last relationship had ended 2 years ago, and since then, he had immersed himself even more in work. When he arrived at Sunshine Children's Home, he was greeted by Gloria Martinez, the director, a gray-haired lady with a warm smile. "Mr. Reynolds, what an honor to have you here. The children are very excited about your visit." The building was modest but well-kept, with colorful walls and children's drawings everywhere. As they walked through the corridors, Gloria explained the projects underway in the future plans for the institution. Marcus listened attentively, making mental notes about possible improvements he could fund. Then he heard it. A sound of laughter coming from the inner garden caught his attention. "It's the little Bennetts," Gloria explained, noticing his interest. 4 twins. They arrived 6 months ago after losing their parents in an accident. Marcus approached the window overlooking the garden. 4 identical children with brown hair and green eyes were playing on a makeshift swing. They must have been around 5 years old. What struck him most was not just their physical resemblance, but the way they interacted, a perfect system of mutual support. "Can I meet them?" he asked, surprising both himself and the principal. In the garden, the children stopped playing when they saw Marcus approaching. "Hello," he said, taking a seat on a nearby bench. "I'm Marcus." The most resourceful of the 4 stepped forward. "I'm Michael," he said, "and these are my siblings, Matthew, Mark, and Madison." For the next hour, Marcus completely forgot about his 3 o'clock appointment. He discovered that Michael was the protector, always looking out for the others. Matthew was the dreamer, with an extraordinary imagination. Mark was the pragmatist, who organized the games. And Madison, the only girl, was the peacemaker, always making sure everyone was okay. "Do you always stay together like this?" asked Marcus, observing how the children moved in sync. "Always," replied Madison, her green eyes sparkling. "We promised each other. We'll never be apart." The simplicity and strength of that promise struck Marcus deeply. Gloria, who was watching the interaction, approached with a worried expression. "This is our biggest challenge with them," she explained quietly. "We've already had a few couples interested in adoption, but nobody wants to adopt 4 children at once," Marcus added, feeling a lump in his throat. Back in the car, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the little Bennetts. His 500-square-meter penthouse suddenly seemed absurdly empty. The meetings in his diary, insignificant. The life he had built, incomplete. James called his driver. "Let's stop by Dr. Richardson's office." Richardson was not only his lawyer, but also his closest friend for 2 decades. When Marcus entered his office and announced his intention to adopt the 4 Bennett twins, Richard almost knocked over his coffee. "Marcus, have you lost your mind? For children? You can barely look after that office plant of yours." "It's a plastic plant, Rich," replied Marcus, with a determined smile. "And yes, maybe I have lost my mind, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters." At the end of that day, Marcus Reynolds, The man who had built his life on calculated decisions and risk analysis began the most impulsive and significant process of his existence. The moment he saw those 4 children in the garden, something changed inside him. It wouldn't be easy. His family would certainly object, his friends would call him crazy, and his life would change completely. But when he went to bed that night, for the first time in years, Marcus felt he was on the right track. In the silence of his penthouse, he imagined what that same space would be like, filled with children's laughter, scattered toys, and 4 little hearts that, like him, were looking for a place to call home. The news of Marcus' decision spread quickly among his closest family and friends. His older sister, Alexandra, was the first to show up at his office the next morning, unannounced. "You can't be serious, Marcus," she said, pacing back and forth in the spacious room. "4 children? All at once? You've never even had a dog." Marcus continued typing on his computer, maintaining the calm he had developed over years of difficult negotiations. "Actually, I had a golden retriever when I was 12. Do you remember Max?" "Don't try to be funny," Alexandra retorted, stopping in front of his desk. "This is completely different. These are 4 human lives that depend entirely on you. Have you thought about the implications?" He finally looked up from the screen. "I thought about each of them all night long. And you know what else I thought about? How our mother raised the 3 of us alone after Dad died, working 2 jobs." The mention of her mother made Alexandra's expression soften. "It's different, Marcus. Mom did the impossible for us," he interrupted her, standing up, "and she had far fewer resources than I do now. If she could do it, why couldn't I?" Meanwhile, at Sunshine Children's home, the Bennett twins continued their routine, oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Gloria Martinez watched the 4 children at breakfast, noticing how they naturally shared their cereal, ensuring that each had the same amount. "Mr. Reynolds called again this morning," she commented to her assistant, Janet. "He wants to start the adoption process as soon as possible. Do you think he knows what he's doing?" Janet asked, concerned. "Raising 4 children isn't like running a company." Gloria smiled, remembering the instant connection she had witnessed the day before. "Sometimes, Janet, the heart knows before reason." Marcus spent the next week reorganizing his life. He hired an architectural firm to redesign his penthouse, turning one of the offices into a bedroom for the boys and his music studio into a bedroom for Madison. She also began researching the best schools in the area and looking for an experienced nanny. Richard, her lawyer, remained skeptical, but was committed to speeding up the legal process. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he asked for the 10th time during a meeting. "There's still time to back out." "Rich, remember when you told me I was crazy to quit my secure job to start my own company?" Marcus replied, leafing through the adoption papers. "Sometimes the best decisions seem crazy to others." The following Saturday, Marcus made his second visit to the orphanage. This time, he brought gifts: an art kit for Matthew, who loved to draw, a set of building blocks for Mark, the builder, a small telescope for Michael, who was fascinated by stars, and a collection of picture books for Madison, who was already showing a love of reading. "You've really come back," exclaimed Madison, her green eyes sparkling as she saw him enter the garden. "I promised I'd come back, didn't I?" Marcus replied, taking a seat on the same bench as on his first visit. The children settled around him, curious about the packages he was carrying. For the next 2 hours, Marcus watched in amazement as each gift was perfectly chosen, reflecting the unique personalities he had already noticed in each of the twins. "You know," said Michael, the eldest by 4 minutes, as he adjusted his telescope, "we've never gotten different presents before. Everyone always gives us the same thing." That simple observation struck Marcus deeply. It was exactly what he had feared, that the world would only see 4 identical children instead of the 4 distinct and special personalities he had come to know. On the way home, his phone rang. It was his mother, Catherine. "Alexandra told me," she said without preamble. "When did you intend to tell me that I'm going to be a grandmother to 4 children at once?" Marcus held his breath, bracing himself for another argument. But what came next surprised him. "Son," Catherine continued, her voice softening, "you've always been the most sensitive of my children, even though you try to hide it from everyone. If you feel this is the right thing to do, then I trust your heart." The tears that Marcus had been holding back for days finally came. "Thank you, Mom," was all he managed to say. That night, alone in his penthouse for the last time. The new furniture was due to arrive on Monday. Marcus found himself imagining what his life would be like in a few weeks' time. The silence that had once comforted him now seemed deafening. The empty spaces begged to be filled with laughter, running, and even crying. His phone vibrated with a message from Gloria. A photo of the twins asleep, all cuddled up to each other, as they always did. Below, she had written, "They asked for you today. I think they have a new hero." Marcus smiled at the photo, feeling a mixture of fear and absolute certainty. Yes, his life was about to change completely. Yes, there would be immense challenges ahead. But looking at those 4 sleeping children, he knew with every fiber of his being that he was doing the right thing. "Soon, little ones," he whispered to the photo. "Soon we'll be a family." The week leading up to the twins' move was a roller coaster of emotions for Marcus. His penthouse, once a symbol of his professional success, was rapidly transforming into a home ready to welcome 4 5-year-olds. The austere walls took on vibrant colors, and the minimalist furniture gave way to more practical and welcoming pieces. Catherine, his mother, became an unexpected ally in this process. With her experience of raising 3 children on her own, she took on the mission of helping Marcus prepare the room properly. "Marcus, darling, you need more than just beds and cupboards," she said, going through the penthouse with a notepad. "Children need space to play, to make a mess, to be children." Following his mother's advice, Marcus hired interior design experts specializing in children's rooms. The boys' room was painted in shades of blue and green. With 3 beds, Michael and Mark insisted on sharing a bunk bed and a dedicated area for activities. Madison's room was given lavender and yellow tones, with a small library and a space for art. The living room, previously dominated by expensive contemporary artworks, now housed a large L-shaped sofa, perfect for family movie sessions. One corner was transformed into a study area, with a large table where everyone could do their homework together. "Have you thought about a school?" asked Alexandra during one of the many family lunches that started to become a regular occurrence. Her initial resistance had turned into a more constructive concern. "Westbrook Academy," replied Marcus. "It has an excellent program for adopted children and an approach that respects individualities, even in the case of twins." Richard, who was also present, raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. You've really done your homework." At the orphanage, Marcus' visits became more frequent. He came 3 times a week, always bringing something new to share with the children. On one of these visits, he found Madison crying quietly in a corner of the garden. "Hey, princess," he approached cautiously. "What happened? What if you give up on us?" she asked, her green eyes watering. "The last family that wanted to adopt only wanted one of us." Marcus felt his heart squeeze. He sat down next to her and took a small necklace out of his pocket. He had planned to give it to her later, but this seemed like the perfect moment. "See this pendant?" He showed her a small silver star. "I bought 5 of them, one for each of us. Do you know why? Because stars are never alone in the sky. They're always part of a constellation, just like the 5 of us are going to be." The other 3 twins, who were watching from afar, approached curiously. Marcus distributed the remaining necklaces, keeping one for himself. "Do you really promise?" asked Michael, the protector, as he put on his necklace. "With all my heart," replied Marcus, realizing that he had never made such a significant promise in his life. In his office, the changes were also noticeable. Patricia, his assistant, reorganized his schedule to include flexible hours to take and pick up the children from school. A photo of the twins, taken during one of his visits, was already prominently displayed on his desk. "Mr. Reynolds," Patricia called him one afternoon, "the social worker is here for the last assessment." Mrs. Henderson, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes, minutely examined every document and every space in the renovated penthouse. "Mr. Reynolds, raising 4 children on your own won't be easy," she commented, taking notes. "Especially considering your position and professional responsibilities." "Nothing that's really worthwhile is easy," he replied, repeating a phrase his mother used to say. "And I won't be alone. I have a strong family supporting me, in the resources to make sure they have everything they need. The social worker smiled for the first time. You know, when I received this case, I was skeptical, but now I can see that you've really prepared for this. Children need love, stability, and someone who sees them as unique individuals. You seem to understand that. The night before the twins were to come home for good, Marcus couldn't sleep. He went through each room of the penthouse several times, checking that everything was perfect. He stopped in the boys' room, where 3 Spider-Man backpacks were waiting for their new owners. In Madison's room, a Wonder Woman backpack rested on the bed decorated with butterflies. Her phone buzzed with a message from Gloria. They're very excited for tomorrow. Madison kept every little present you gave her under her pillow. Michael won't take off his necklace. Matthew has designed your new family. And Mark has already drawn up a schedule of activities for the first week. Marcus smiled and sat down in the armchair he had bought especially for reading stories before bed. Tomorrow, that silence would be filled with children's voices, laughter, maybe a few fights. After all, they were real children, not characters from a fairy tale. But above all, it would be filled with love. "Good night, little ones," he whispered to the empty apartment. "Tomorrow we begin our story together." The day dawned with a different energy in Marcus Reynolds' penthouse. It was an ordinary Thursday for the rest of Manhattan, but for that apartment on the top floor, it was the beginning of a new era. Marcus woke up before the alarm clock, his hands slightly shaky as he prepared his breakfast. "Breathe," he said to his reflection in the bathroom mirror. "You're ready for this?" At 9 a.m. sharp, his mother Catherine arrived, carrying bags of homemade snacks and a few extra toys she had bought on the way. "I thought the children might want something familiar and comforting on the first day," she explained, starting to organize everything in the newly refurbished kitchen. The plan was simple. Marcus and Catherine would pick up the twins from the orphanage at 10 a.m. Gloria, the director, had suggested that the transition be made in the morning, giving the children time to adapt to their new surroundings during the day. On the way to Sunshine Children's Home, Marcus was silent, his heart beating harder and harder. Catherine held his hand, as she did when he was little and nervous before a school presentation. "You know," she said softly, "when you were born, I was terrified too. Your father had just gotten that promotion. We were moving to a bigger apartment, and I had no idea if I'd be a good mother. But the moment I put you in my arms, everything made sense." Marcus squeezed his mother's hand, grateful for her presence and wisdom. At the orphanage, the twins were ready, each with a small suitcase containing their belongings. Madison wore a new blue dress, a gift from Gloria, and the boys wore matching shirts, but in different colors, a suggestion from Marcus to help them maintain their individuality. "Remember," Michael told his brothers, in his usual protective role, "we need to be very well behaved in the new house. But we can still play, can't we?" Matthew asked anxiously, his new art kit under his arm. "Of course you can," Marcus replied, entering the living room. "It's your house now, too." The children ran to hug him, a scene that made Gloria and Catherine's eyes fill with tears. Mark, always the most observant, noticed Catherine's presence. "Who are you?" he asked politely. "This is my mother, Catherine," Marcus introduced. She's your grandmother now." Catherine knelt down so that she was level with the children. "And I'm very happy to meet my new grandchildren." The final paperwork was signed, the last recommendations were given, and after emotional hugs from Gloria and the other orphanage staff, the new family made their way to the car. Marcus had rented a spacious van to accommodate everyone comfortably. During the journey, the children oscillated between moments of excitement, pointing at the tall buildings and colorful shop windows, and periods of contemplative silence, when the reality of the move seemed to weigh a little heavier. "Is it very high?" Madison asked when they reached Marcus' building. "Yes, it is," he replied, helping them out of the car. "But you'll love the view. You can see the whole of Central Park from up there." In the elevator, Michael held tightly to Madison, who seemed a little nervous about the height. Mark counted the floor numbers out loud, while Matthew drew imaginary shapes on the mirror with his finger. When the penthouse door opened, 4 pairs of green eyes widened in amazement. Sunlight streamed in through the large windows, illuminating the space that had been completely transformed to welcome them. "Come," Marcus called. "I want to show you your rooms." The children's reaction to the spaces prepared especially for them was beyond their expectations. Madison was speechless when she saw their little library, running her fingers through the colorful books. The boys jumped for joy at the bunk bed and toy area. "Do we have a table just for drawing?" Matthew asked excitedly, discovering the art space. "And look at that fixed telescope," Michael exclaimed, running to the sheltered balcony where a professional telescope had been installed. Mark, ever the pragmatist, was already organizing his closet space, putting away his few clothes with meticulous care. Catherine watched everything from the doorway, her heart overflowing as she saw how her son had thought of every detail to make the children feel at home. "I'll prepare lunch," she announced, letting Marcus have this special moment with his new children. The first family lunch was a mixture of nervous laughter, little napkin accidents, and shared stories. Catherine had prepared pasta with meatballs, a dish she knew was a favorite with the children, according to the information Gloria had shared. "Can we call you Dad?" Madison suddenly asked in the middle of lunch, making everyone stop eating. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Only if you want to," he replied softly. "You can call me whatever you feel comfortable with." The four of them looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only twins seem capable of having. It was Michael who spoke for everyone. "We want to." That night, after a day full of discoveries, games, and occasional tears of nostalgia for the orphanage, Marcus got ready for his first bedtime story session. He sat down in the armchair he had chosen especially for this moment, with the four of them gathered around him. "Which story do you want to hear?" he asked, showing them some books he had sorted. "Tell us ours," Madison asked, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "The story of how we became a family." Marcus smiled, putting the books away. "Well, it all started on an ordinary day, when a man who thought he had everything in life discovered that he actually had nothing that really mattered, until he met four very special little stars. And so, under the starry Manhattan sky, visible through the large windows of the penthouse, a new family began to write its own story. The first week as a father of four taught Marcus more about himself than his previous 42 years of life. Each day brought new challenges, small victories, and moments of pure magic that made him wonder how he had lived so long without that organized chaos in his life. On Monday morning, he faced his first big test, preparing four children for their first day at the new school. Westbrook Academy had agreed to accept the twins in the middle of the semester, after Marcus made a generous donation to the institution's scholarship program. "Madison, you need to eat your breakfast," he insisted, as the girl played with her cereal. "Michael, please help Mark find his other shoe. Matthew, the crayons can wait until after school." Catherine, who had practically moved into the apartment that first week, watched the scene with a nostalgic smile. "You're doing better than you think," she commented, helping to organize the lunchboxes. The journey to school was a symphony of anxious voices and endless questions. Marcus had hired a van with a driver to take the children every day, but he made a point of accompanying them personally on the first day. "What if the other students don't like us?" asked Matthew, his voice trembling slightly. "It's impossible not to like you," Marcus replied, adjusting the rearview mirror to see all the faces in the back seat. "Just be yourselves." At the entrance to Westbrook Academy, other parents watched curiously as the well-known businessman arrived with his four adopted children. Marcus noticed the stares, but kept his attention focused on the children. "Remember," he said, kneeling down so that he was at their height, "you may be in different rooms, but you're still a team, and I'll be here to pick you up at the end of the day." Madison hugged him tightly, followed by her brothers. "Do you really promise you'll be here?" she asked. "Have I broken any promises so far?" he replied with a smile, touching the star necklace she was wearing. Back at the office, Marcus found his desk covered in urgent reports and unanswered emails. Patricia, his assistant, had done an excellent job keeping everything under control, but some decisions needed him personally. "Mr. Reynolds," she called out, entering with another pile of documents. "The West Coast investors are waiting for your confirmation for tomorrow's video conference." Marcus looked at his watch. 14:30. In less than 2 hours, he would need to pick up the children. "Can we reschedule for Thursday? I want to be available for the first few days of school, in case any emergencies arise." Patricia smiled, understanding. "Of course. By the way, Your sister Alexandra called. She wants to know if she can take her nephews for a walk at the weekend. Alexandra's transformation from staunch skeptic to doting aunt had been one of the most pleasant surprises of the last few weeks. She had fallen in love with her nephews the moment she met them, especially Madison, with whom she shared a love of books. At 4:15 p.m., Marcus was already at the school gate, as anxious as if it were his own first day at school. The twins left at different times, first Madison and Matthew, then Mark, and finally Michael. "How was it?" he asked as they walked to the van. "My teacher let me show my drawings to the class," Matthew exclaimed excitedly. "We did an experiment with plants in science class," Mark added, always fascinated by discoveries. "There's a girl in my class who also has the star necklace," Madison commented, "but hers isn't the same as ours." Michael, however, was strangely quiet. Marcus noticed and, when they got home, called the boy into his office for a private chat, now equipped with a comfortable sofa especially for moments like this. "Do you want to tell me what's bothering you, champ?" Michael played with his necklace for a moment before answering. "Some kids kept asking questions about our family. They wanted to know why we have a rich father but wear normal clothes." Marcus felt his heart squeeze. He knew moments like this would come, but it still hurt. "And what did you say?" "I said that you love us for who we are, not for what we can have," Michael replied, surprising Marcus with his maturity. "That's what you told us on the first day, remember?" That evening, over dinner, Marcus observed how each of the twins had developed their own way of dealing with the changes. Matthew drew his experiences, turning fears into art. Mark created lists and schedules, seeking order in chaos. Madison took refuge in books, finding characters who understood her feelings. And Michael, the protector, carried everyone's worries on his small shoulders. "Dad," Madison called out as he covered her up to go to sleep, "do you think our mother and father, the others, would be happy with our new family?" The question took him by surprise. It was the first time either of the twins had mentioned their biological parents since their adoption. "I'm sure they would," he replied softly, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Because real parents only want to see their children happy and loved. And you are very loved here." Later, in his own room, Marcus reflected on how his life had changed in such a short time. Important meetings now competed with school schedules and extracurricular activities. His once spotless closet now housed colorful drawings and small gifts made in class, and his heart, which used to be concerned only with stock market indices and million-dollar contracts, now beat to the rhythm of 4 little lives that depended on him for much more than just material sustenance. "It's not easy," he muttered to himself, "but it's perfectly imperfect." As fall progressed in New York, the new Reynolds family found its own rhythm. Marcus had learned that being a father meant much more than providing a comfortable home and quality education. It was a constant exercise in patience, adaptation, and, above all, unconditional love. One particularly hectic morning, while he was trying to coordinate the twins' breakfast, his phone kept ringing. A crisis in the company required his immediate presence, but Madison had been running a fever since the night before. "Patricia," he said into the phone, while placing his hand on Madison's forehead, "I need to reschedule all the morning meetings. My daughter is ill." It was still strange and wonderfully new to say words like, "my daughter." Across the table, Michael watched his sister with concern, while Mark was already checking the digital thermometer for the 3rd time. "But Dad," Matthew interfered, "today is the day I have to present my science project at school." Marcus felt the familiar weight of guilt that all working parents seem to carry. How to be in 2 places at once. How not to let anyone down. "I can help," a familiar voice sounded from the kitchen door. It was Alexandra, who had developed a habit of appearing at the most necessary moments. "I'll take the kids to school and stay with Madison." "But the crisis at the company," Marcus began. "It can be solved after you've seen Matthew's project," Alexandra added, picking up her bag. "Some things can't wait, little brother." Matthew's presentation was about the solar system, something he had developed a special interest in since discovering the telescope on the balcony. His handmade model, with Marcus' help over an entire weekend, even included a small mechanism that made the planet spin. "See, Dad," Matthew smiled proudly after his presentation, "I put an extra star near Mars. It's our constellation." On the way home, Marcus received a text from Alexandra with a photo of Madison sleeping peacefully, her fever having subsided. Next to her, a pile of books indicated that her aunt had spent the morning reading stories to her. At the office, the crisis was brought under control with a few strategic calls in the expertise of her team. Patricia, who at first was skeptical about her boss's new life, was now one of the biggest supporters of his new lifestyle. "You know," she commented as she organized her schedule, "I've never seen you make such assertive decisions as you do now. It's as if having the children has sharpened your instincts." Marcus reflected on this during the afternoon. It was true, his ability to prioritize, to see the bigger picture without missing the important details, had improved significantly since becoming a father. In the evening, over dinner, Mark presented his newest list, something he did when he was especially anxious about something. "These are the things we need to do before Christmas," he explained, showing a meticulously organized sheet of paper. Only 2 months to go. Marcus took the list and felt his heart squeeze. Among the common items like buy a tree and bake cookies, there was one that stood out: take our first official family photo. "We can do that this weekend," she suggested, noticing how the children's eyes lit up. "I know an excellent photographer. Can we wear matching outfits?" Madison asked, already recovered from her fever. "Not exactly the same," Michael added quickly, always concerned about maintaining their individuality. "How about coordinated colors?" Marcus suggested, remembering his family therapist's advice about balancing the twins' togetherness with their individual identities. On Saturday, dressed in shades of blue and gray, they met at the photographer's studio. What was supposed to be a quick session turned into a whole morning of laughter, improvised poses, and genuine moments captured by the lens. "Now one with Dad," the photographer suggested, and Marcus found himself surrounded by 4 pairs of tiny arms, for identical but unique smiles, for hearts that had transformed his life in ways he never imagined possible. Later, as they hung some of the photos on the living room wall, now transformed into a gallery of family moments, Catherine appeared for Sunday dinner, a tradition she had instituted since the arrival of her grandchildren. "You look like a real family," she commented, looking at the photos. "Grandma," Madison corrected with the wisdom of her 5 years. "We are a real family. It just takes us a little longer to find each other." That night, after putting the children to bed, a ritual that now included 4 different stories, for glasses of water and countless good nights, Marcus sat in his office, looking at the framed photo on his desk. In it, the 5 of them were smiling for the camera, but what really caught his attention was something deeper. The sense of belonging that emanated from the image. Her phone vibrated with a message from Richard. "Important meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late." Marcus smiled and replied, "I'll be there at 8:30. I have to drop 4 little geniuses off at school first." Priorities had changed, schedules had been adjusted, and his life had been completely transformed. But every challenge, every moment of doubt or tiredness was compensated 1,000 times over by the smiles in the morning, the spontaneous hugs, the whispered, "I love you, Dad," before bed. Going upstairs to check on the children one last time, a habit he had developed over the last few weeks, he found Michael awake, looking out of the window. "Can't sleep, champ?" "I was wondering," the boy replied, "what it would be like if you hadn't met us that day at the orphanage." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, pulling Michael into a hug. "You know what I think? That some people are destined to meet, even if it takes a while, even if the path is different from what we imagine. Like a constellation?" Michael asked sleepily. "Exactly like a constellation," Marcus replied, smoothing the blanket over his son. "Each star shines alone, but together they form something even more special." Winter arrived in New York, bringing not only snow, but also new challenges and discoveries for the Reynolds family. After 3 months of living together, the bonds between father and son grew stronger every day, but deeper and more complex questions also arose. One particularly cold December evening, while helping Madison with her homework, Marcus noticed something different about his daughter's behavior. She seemed distant, her usual bright eyes pensive as she drew her family tree, a school assignment. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "can I put you and Grandma Catherine up here, along with my other parents?" Marcus felt his heart squeeze. It was the first time Madison had so clearly expressed her desire to unite her two worlds, the past and the present. "Of course you can, princess," she replied softly. "You're lucky to have so many people who love you, aren't you?" In the next room, Michael watched the scene through the ajar door. As the oldest of the four, even by minutes, he always carried an extra sense of responsibility. Marcus called him to join them. "Come here, champ. I think you should all do this together." Soon, the four twins were sitting around the kitchen table, each with their own paper, creating their own versions of a family tree that reflected their unique and special family history. "Look at that," Mark commented, always analytical. "Our tree has more branches than the other students." "That means we have more love," Matthew concluded, carefully coloring each name with a different color. The next morning, over coffee, Marcus received an unexpected call from Gloria, the orphanage director. She had found a photo album of the twins as babies, left by their biological parents. "I think it's time they had this," Gloria said gently. "You've done a wonderful job, Marcus. They're ready." The decision of how to present the album to his children consumed Marcus throughout the day. In his office, between important meetings, he found himself looking out of the window, thinking about how their lives had become so deeply and meaningfully intertwined. "Dad," Madison's excited voice snapped him out of his thoughts when he got home. "Guess what? My teacher said my family tree was the prettiest in the class." Marcus smiled, taking his seat on the sofa and beckoning everyone closer. "I've got a surprise for you," he announced, taking the album out of his briefcase. The four of them approached curiously. When he opened the album, a reverent silence filled the room. There they were, newborn babies, in the arms of their biological parents. "Is that our mother?" Matthew asked quietly, touching a photo of a young, smiling woman holding two babies. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice breaking, "and you have the same green eyes as her." For the next hour, father and son immersed themselves in memories, some painful, some sweet. Marcus observed how each one processed the information in a unique way. Michael kept every detail, as if putting together a puzzle in his mind. Madison whispered stories for each photo. Mark mentally organized the dates and events, and Matthew occasionally picked up his pencils to reproduce a scene that particularly touched him. "Dad," Michael said after a while, "that doesn't change anything, does it? You're still our father." Marcus pulled the four of them into a tight hug. "Nothing in the world can change that. Having more love is never a problem, remember?" That night, after putting the children to bed, Marcus called his mother. Catherine had become not only a devoted grandmother, but also his main advisor on this parenthood journey. "You did the right thing," she said after hearing about the album. "They need to know where they've come from to understand where they're going." The next day, over breakfast, Marcus noticed something different. On the dining room wall, where usually only their most recent photos as a family were, Madison had hung one of the photos from the album, the one with her biological parents, next to the official photo they had taken weeks before. "I thought it would look nice like this," she explained shyly when she noticed her father watching. "Now our story is complete." Marcus felt his eyes water. In just a few months, their lives had been transformed in ways he had never imagined possible. Every challenge, every difficult moment, every small victory had contributed to strengthening the bonds that united them. "Do you know what else we can do?" she suggested as she helped Mark tie his shoes for school. "We could create a new album, with all our memories together." The idea was met with enthusiasm. Soon, the twins were planning which moments they wanted to record first. The first snow they saw from the rooftop, the day they learned to make cookies with Grandma Catherine, the afternoon studying with Aunt Alexandra. "And we can put our family tree on the front page," Madison suggested, her eyes sparkling at the possibility. As he watched them get into the school van, each carrying not only their backpacks but also the light weight of their intertwined histories, Marcus realized that true love doesn't erase the past. It incorporates it, honors it, and builds on it for an even richer and more meaningful future. The arrival of spring brought not only the blooming of flowers in Central Park, but also a series of significant changes in the lives of the Reynolds family. 6 months had passed since the adoption, and Marcus watched in amazement as his children blossomed, each in their own unique way. One particularly hectic morning, while trying to coordinate breakfast, Marcus received an unexpected call from the family lawyer of the twins' biological parents. Mr. Reynolds, the formal voice on the other end of the line, informed him. The children's maternal grandparents have expressed a desire to meet them. They have just moved back to the United States and… Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. He looked across the coffee table, where his four little miracles were excitedly discussing their plans for the weekend. "We need to talk about this in person," he replied, keeping his voice low. "But first, I need to talk to my children." The news weighed heavily on his shoulders all morning. At the office, not even the good news about the company's expansion could completely distract him. Patricia, noticing his restlessness, brought him a cup of coffee and sat down in front of his desk. "Would you like to talk about it?" she offered gently. Marcus sighed, turning the star necklace that matched his children's in his hands. "What if they want to choose, Patricia? What if meeting their biological grandparents makes them…" "Marcus Reynolds," she interrupted him firmly, "those children love you more than anything in the world. Having more people to love them will only enrich their lives." That evening, after dinner, Marcus gathered the twins in the living room. Catherine, who had come for the regular family dinner, offered to stay for support. "Kids," he began, taking a seat on the floor with them. "Remember when we talked about how families can come in different shapes and sizes?" Madison nodded, clutching her favorite book against her chest, a habit she kept up when she was anxious. "Like our special family tree?" "Exactly," Marcus smiled. "Well, today I found out that your mother's parents, your maternal grandparents, would very much like to meet you." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael, ever the protector, was the first to speak. "But you're still going to be our father, aren't you?" The question broke Marcus' heart. He pulled the four of them close to him, feeling the precious weight of their lives intertwined with his own. "Always," he replied firmly. "Nothing in the world can change that. They'd just be more people to love you, like Grandma Catherine and Aunt Alexandra." Mark, pragmatic as ever, was already processing the information in his own way. "Do they live far away? How are we going to organize visits?" "They've just moved to Boston," Marcus explained, "but the decision to meet them is entirely up to you. No one is going to force anything." Matthew, who had been unusually quiet, got up and walked over to the wall where the family photos were. He pointed to the photo of his birth parents that Madison had hung up months before. "Did they know our mother when she was little like us?" The question made everyone's eyes fill with tears. Catherine, who was watching the scene from her armchair, got up and joined the family circle on the floor. "I'm sure they have lots of stories to tell about your mother," she said softly, "and you can decide whether you want to hear those stories or not." In the days that followed, Marcus observed how each of the twins processed the news in their own unique way. Madison started writing a diary, something Catherine had suggested to help her organize her feelings. Michael spent more time at the telescope, as if the stars could offer answers. Mark created a new list of questions he wanted to ask his grandparents, and Matthew started drawing imaginary portraits of the extended family. A week later, over dinner, Madison made the announcement, "We want to meet them, Dad, but only if you're with us." The other three nodded in agreement. Marcus felt his heart expand with even more love for those little beings who had transformed his life so completely. "Of course, I'll be together," he promised. "We'll always be together." The meeting was arranged for 2 weeks later, at a family restaurant in Manhattan. Marcus spent hours on the phone with the lawyer and Gloria from the orphanage, making sure everything went as smoothly as possible for the children. The night before the meeting, while making his nightly rounds of the rooms, he found the four twins huddled together on Madison's bed, all wearing their star necklaces. "Can't you sleep?" she asked, joining them. "Dad," Madison began, her voice small in the darkness, "do you think they'll like us?" "How could anyone not?" he replied, hugging them. "You're the most special people I've ever met, even if we're different from what they imagined." Mark asked. "Especially because you are exactly who you are," Marcus affirmed. "And you know what? No matter what happens tomorrow, nothing changes the fact that we're a family." "A constellation," Michael corrected with a smile. "That's right," Marcus laughed. "A permanent constellation in each other's skies." That night, as he watched them finally fall asleep, Marcus reflected on how true love knows no limits or conditions. Their family was not conventional, but it was real and strong, built with blocks of love, trust, and acceptance. The future held more surprises and challenges, but they would face everything together, as they always had since that first meeting in the orphanage garden. Because some people are destined to meet, and when they do, they form bonds that not even time or distance can break. The meeting with the twins' maternal grandparents took place on a sunny spring Saturday. Marcus chose the Garden Cafe, a family-run restaurant near Central Park, known for its cozy atmosphere and indoor garden where the children could play under supervision. "Is everyone wearing their necklaces?" he asked as he adjusted his tie in the elevator mirror. It was a habit they had developed, touching the star necklaces at important moments as a silent reminder of their union. "Yes," they replied in unison, each holding up their silver pendant. Robert and Eleanor Thompson arrived punctually at 11 a.m. Marcus recognized them immediately. Eleanor had the same green eyes that she had passed on to her daughter and, consequently, to her grandchildren. Robert was carrying a photo album and a large package. The first moment was absolutely silent. The children, normally chatty, watched their grandparents with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Eleanor was the first to break the ice, kneeling down so that she was level with her grandchildren. "You're even more beautiful in person," she said, her voice breaking. "You have my Sarah's eyes." Michael, ever the protector, stepped forward. "Do you have any photos of our mother when she was little?" "I have lots," Eleanor smiled, looking at the album Robert was holding. "Would you like to see them?" The next few minutes were filled with stories about Sarah Thompson, a girl who loved astronomy, explaining Michael's fascination with the telescope, and who always carried a sketchbook, a talent Matthew had inherited. "She used to organize our whole house," Robert commented with a nostalgic smile, watching Mark, who was already mentally categorizing the photos he saw. "And she was always the peacemaker between the cousins, just like Madison." Marcus watched the interaction with mixed emotions. There was the natural fear of losing space in his children's hearts, but also a deep gratitude for being able to offer them more pieces of the puzzle of their origins. "Mr. Reynolds," Eleanor turned to him, "we can't thank you enough for how you've taken care of them. We see so much of Sarah in each one, but we also see the love and security you've provided." The parcel Robert was carrying turned out to be 4 old music boxes, all identical. "They were from Sarah's collection," he explained. "She always said that one day she would give one to each of her children." Madison opened her box first, and a soft melody of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" filled the room. Her eyes filled with tears as she held the gift against her chest. "It's like our constellation, Dad," she whispered, looking at Marcus. Lunch went surprisingly smoothly. The Thompsons shared stories about Sarah and David, the twins' father, always with respect to the present and the new family that had been formed. Marcus contributed recent stories about the children, creating a bridge between past and present. "You could come to Boston for the summer vacation," Eleanor suggested cautiously. "We have a house on the beach, and Sarah loved spending her summers there." Marcus noticed 4 pairs of green eyes turn to him, waiting for his answer. "I think we can organize that," he said with a smile. "Maybe we can all go together." The suggestion caused visible surprise in the Thompsons. "You too?" Robert asked. "Of course," Marcus replied firmly. "We're all family now, aren't we?" After lunch, while the children played in the garden under Eleanor's watchful eye, Robert pulled Marcus into a conversation. "When we heard that a single millionaire had adopted our grandchildren, we were skeptical," he admitted. "But seeing you with them today, it's clear that the universe knew what it was doing." Marcus watched his children playing, their star necklaces shining in the sun. "You know, for a long time I thought success meant numbers in a bank account. They taught me that true wealth is having enough love to share." At the end of the afternoon, the goodbyes were emotional but hopeful. Promises of visits, video calls, and summers on the beach were made. The Thompsons left leaving not a void, but a feeling of completeness. Back at the penthouse, as he helped Madison position her music box next to the bed, Marcus realized that his initial fear had been replaced by gratitude. His children didn't have less love for him, they just had more love in their lives. "Dad," Madison called out as he covered her, "we have 2 constellations now, don't we? One in the sky and one here on Earth." "That's right, Princess," he replied, kissing her forehead. And do you know what the best part is? They're both ours forever. That evening, after all the music boxes had played their lullaby tunes, Marcus sat in his office, looking out over the illuminated city. His phone vibrated with a message from Catherine. "How was it?" "Better than I could have imagined," she replied. "They didn't come to take my place. They came to expand our constellation." The metaphor of the stars, which had begun as a simple gift to comfort Madison, had become the perfect description of her unconventional family. Each person was a unique star, shining with their own light, but together they formed something even more extraordinary. On his desk, next to the official family photo, Marcus placed a new photograph taken that day. Him, the twins and the Thompsons, all smiling in the spring sunshine. It was the image of a family that transcended traditional definitions, united not by obligation, but by choice and love. The year had passed since that first visit to Sunshine Children's home. Marcus Reynolds was standing in his penthouse office, watching the Manhattan sunset as he adjusted his tie. A ritual that now had a completely different meaning. "Dad, Madison won't give me back my portable telescope," Michael's voice echoed down the corridor. "That's because you took my new book without asking," Madison retorted. Marcus smiled, remembering how silence used to dominate that space. Now, his life was filled with sibling arguments, sudden laughter, and small daily crises that made each day unique and precious. "Children, we're going to be late for the ceremony," Catherine called out from the living room, where she was adjusting Madison's dress. It was a special day, the one-year anniversary of the twins' official adoption. Marcus had organized a celebration in the garden of Sunshine Children's home, bringing together all the people who had been part of this extraordinary journey. "Mark, where's your list?" asked Marcus, knowing that his more organized son had prepared a detailed schedule for the day. "Here," Mark replied, pulling a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. "First the ceremony, then the speeches, then the cake, and finally, the surprises," Matthew added, his eyes shining with anticipation. He had spent the whole week drawing pictures to decorate the venue. The transformation of their lives over the last year had been profound. The Thompsons, their maternal grandparents, had become an integral part of the family, visiting regularly and taking part in important moments. The summer at the beach house in Boston had been a success, creating memories that further strengthened the bonds between everyone. Alexandra, who had initially been the biggest skeptic, was now a constant presence on weekends, organizing reading sessions with Madison and art classes with Matthew. Richard, the lawyer friend, had become Uncle Rich, always bringing educational gifts and valuable advice. In the car on the way to the orphanage, Marcus watched his children through the rearview mirror. Michael, now 6, was explaining something about constellations to Mark, who was methodically writing everything down. Madison read aloud passages from her diary to Matthew, who sketched the scenes in his sketchbook. "Thinking about how everything has changed?" Catherine asked softly, noticing her son's contemplative gaze. "Thinking about how some changes are actually returns to what should always have been," he replied, touching his star necklace. The Sunshine Children's home was decorated with lights and flowers. Gloria, still the director, had organized everything with the same care with which she had conducted the adoption process a year earlier. The Thompsons were already there, Eleanor helping to arrange the last of the decorations while Robert organized the photographs that would be displayed. A visual timeline of the family's journey. "Mr. Reynolds," Gloria greeted him with a warm hug. "Or rather, Marcus, I still get emotional seeing how that first visit changed so many lives." The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. Each person present shared a memory or reflection on the past year. Patricia talked about how the office had been transformed by the children's frequent visits. Alexandra admitted, between laughter and tears, how wrong she had been in her initial concerns. "Our family is like a puzzle," Madison said when it was her turn to speak, her voice small but firm. "Each piece is different and special, and together we form a complete picture." Michael, Mark, and Matthew agreed, each adding their own perspective on how their lives had intertwined in unexpected and wonderful ways. When it was Marcus' turn to speak, he needed a few moments to get his emotions under control. "A year ago, I thought I was changing the lives of 4 children," he began. I didn't realize that they were the ones who would change mine in ways I never imagined possible. I learned that family isn't something you're born with, it's something you build, cultivate, and choose every day. The party that followed was a celebration of love in all its forms. Children from the orphanage mingled with executives from Marcus' company, creating a unique atmosphere of joy and hope. The Thompsons' music boxes played softly in the background, their melodies mingling with the laughter and conversation. As the sun set, painting the New York sky in shades of pink and orange, Marcus gathered his children in the garden, the same place where he first met them. Each held a small luminous balloon. "Look," he pointed to the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Just as each star has its place in the sky, each of us has our place in this family. Different, unique, but part of the same constellation." "And now we have even more stars," Matthew exclaimed, looking at the Thompsons, Catherine, Alexandra, and all the others who had joined the circle. "The more love, the better," Marcus smiled, remembering Patricia's wise words a year earlier. Together, they released the luminous balloons, watching them soar towards the stars. Madison held her father's hand, her green eyes reflecting the lights in the sky. "Dad," she said softly, "do you know what the coolest thing about constellations is?" "What, princess?" "They never end. We can always find more stars to add." That night, long after the children had fallen asleep, exhausted but happy, Marcus sat in his office, now decorated with Matthew's drawings, Mark's lists, Michael's astronomical notes, and Madison's poems. On the wall, a new photograph had joined the collection. The whole family gathered in the orphanage garden, their star necklaces shining in the sun. He touched his own necklace, thinking about how a simple gift to comfort 4 children had become the perfect symbol of his unconventional family. Each person a unique star, shining with their own light, but part of something bigger and more beautiful when together. "A complete constellation," he murmured to himself, smiling as he listened to the distant sound of the music boxes coming from the children's bedrooms, playing their eternal lullaby about stars shining in the sky.